On the planet Varellus 9, the sky was dark and filled with smoke. Explosions had ended only a few hours ago, and the ground was still warm from the fires of battle. Human Lieutenant Ethan Cole lay half-buried under the wreckage of a burned transport, his body bruised and bleeding. His communication device was broken and his squad was gone. The only sounds around him were the distant thunder of collapsing metal and the whisper of ash carried by the wind. He tried to move, groaning in pain, but he knew he had to find shelter before nightfall. Varellus 9 was not a friendly world. It was ruled by the Sarathi Legion, a race of tall, armored warriors who followed strict codes of war. Their armor was black and silver, glowing faintly with strange symbols, and their faces were always hidden behind shining visors. Humans called them the Steel Spirits because no one had ever seen what was behind those helmets. The Sarathi fought without mercy, and their machines patrolled the skies endlessly. Ethan knew that if they found him, he would not live long enough to explain who he was. He dragged himself toward the ruins of an abandoned outpost. It had once been a human colony before the Sarathi took it years ago. Broken walls still carried the marks of blaster fire. A faded human flag hung from a pole, tattered and gray. Ethan crawled into a half-collapsed building and sat against a wall, trying to catch his breath. His shoulder was bleeding, his leg hurt, and he had only one ration pack left. He laughed weakly to himself and whispered, "Well, this is one fine vacation spot." The sound of metal footsteps made him freeze. They were slow and heavy like thunder on stone. He looked around, but there was nowhere to hide. A tall shadow appeared at the entrance, and then he saw her, a Sarathi soldier in full armor. The armor was sleek, shining with faint blue lines of light. She carried a plasma rifle that hummed softly, and her visor glowed like molten silver. She aimed her weapon at him and said in a calm, firm voice, "Humans, surrender." Ethan raised his hand slowly. "Trust me," he said with a tired smile. "I'm in no condition to resist." She stepped closer, her armor making a low mechanical sound. For a moment, Ethan expected her to shoot, but instead she stopped and tilted her head, studying him. "You are injured," she said. "Your unit is gone. Why are you still here?" Ethan looked up, still breathing hard. "Bad luck. And maybe because I'm too stubborn to die." Her visor flickered slightly, almost like surprise. She looked down at his wound and then around the ruins. After a few seconds, she lowered her weapon. "You will die if you stay here," she said. Ethan winced. "You're not planning to kill me after patching me up, right?" The Sarathi woman looked at him. "If I wanted to kill you, you would already be dead." He gave a small laugh. "Good point." She cleaned his wound with a strange gel that burned but quickly sealed the cut. Her movements were precise, practiced, and almost gentle. When she finished, she sat across from him, her visor reflecting the dim light. "Why did you come to this planet?" She asked. "Orders," Ethan said. "I didn't exactly choose it. We were told this place was abandoned." She was quiet for a moment. "Humans always come to places they should not." He looked at her visor and said softly, "And Sarathi always wear masks. Maybe we both make bad choices." That made her pause. "Masks protect us," she said. "Maybe," he replied, "but they also hide us." For the first time, her voice softened. "You speak as if hiding is wrong." Ethan shrugged weakly. "Sometimes it's easier to fight when you don't have to show your face. But sometimes it's harder to live that way." The bunker went silent again. Only the sound of the power core filled the space. She stood up and looked toward the ceiling, where the faint rumble of Sarathi drones could be heard moving above the ruins. "You should rest," she said. "It is not safe, but it will do for now." He nodded slowly, already half asleep from exhaustion. Before drifting off, he said quietly, "Do I get to know your name?" There was a pause before she answered. "Commander Thara Ven." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm Ethan Cole. Nice to meet you." Commander Ethan smiled lightly. "Hope keeps us going." "That and coffee." She didn't answer, but her head tilted slightly, almost as if she was trying to understand what he meant. Then she walked toward the small console at the corner of the bunker. "Your people are searching for you," she said. "There is a signal in orbit, but if I contact them, my kind will detect it too. You would both die." He nodded slowly. "So we stay quiet, huh? Works for me. Never liked being the center of attention." Her visor flickered for a second, maybe amusement, maybe confusion. Ethan could not tell. He leaned back against the wall. "Thanks, by the way, for saving me," he said softly. "Most Sarathi don't exactly have a reputation for mercy." Thara stood still for a long moment. Mercy is not our code, she said finally. But killing a wounded man serves no honor. Ethan grinned faintly. Then I guess I owe my life to Sarathi honor. She didn't reply, but he thought he heard the smallest sound of air escaping her armor, like a quiet sigh. Hours passed in silence. Thara worked on repairing parts of her damaged armor, using tools that hummed and sparked. Ethan watched her with curiosity. She moved with precision and strength, yet something about her felt lonely. He wanted to speak, to make her talk more, but every time he opened his mouth, her visor turned toward him like a warning light. At one point, he asked, "So, how long have you been fighting this war?" "Long enough," she said simply. "That's not really an answer. It is the only one I have." Ethan chuckled. "You sound like my old commander." She paused, then said quietly, "Do humans joke when they are afraid?" "Pretty much all the time," he said with a grin. "Helps us stay sane." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "And are you afraid now?" Ethan looked at her and thought for a moment. "A little, but not of you." Her visor flickered again. She looked away. "You should be," he smiled. "If you wanted me dead, I'd already be a pile of ash. So no, I'm not afraid of you." She turned back slowly, studying him again. Her voice grew softer. "Humans are strange." "Yeah," he said. "That's what makes us interesting." The bunker's power core hummed louder and lights flickered. Thara checked the readings on her console. "Storm approaching," she said. "Radiation level rising outside. We cannot leave for several hours." "Guess we're stuck together then," Ethan said lightly. "Indeed." He smiled at her tone. "You make that sound like a bad thing." "I do not understand you," she said after a pause. "You joke even when there is nothing to laugh about. You speak to your enemy as if to a friend. Are all humans this foolish?" Ethan looked at her carefully. "Maybe we just like to believe there's more to life than fighting. Maybe some of us still hope the enemy can become something else." She didn't answer. For a long time, only the sound of the storm above filled the silence. Later, as the storm raged outside, Thara sat near him. She didn't remove her helmet, but her voice was calmer. "Ethan Cole," she said, "why do humans fight this war?" "You gain nothing." "You lose everything," he sighed softly. "We fight because we believe freedom matters. We fight because someone has to stand up when others fall. Maybe that's foolish, but it's who we are." Thara's voice dropped lower. "In my world, belief is weakness. Obedience is strength." "Sounds lonely," he said quietly. Her visor dimmed. "It is not for me to question it." "But you do," Ethan said gently. She looked at him again. "You think you know me, human?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but I'd like to." For a moment there was silence again. Then for the first time she asked a question of her own that wasn't military or cold. "What do humans want most?" Ethan blinked, surprised. Then he smiled slowly. "Peace, and maybe some food that doesn't taste like metal." Her head tilted again. "You are not serious." "I am," he said with a grin. "Well, mostly. We want connection. A reason to wake up tomorrow. Someone who understands us." She didn't respond, but something in her body language changed. She stood up suddenly and turned away as if hiding something. He watched her silently, realizing he had touched something inside her that even she didn't understand. That night, the storm ended and the world above grew quiet again. Ethan lay awake, staring at the low ceiling of the bunker. He could hear Thara's armor humming softly as she stood guard at the door. He thought about the question she had asked. What do humans want most? He smiled in the dark and whispered to himself, and Thara didn't turn around right away. "The storm has cleared," she said. "But the patrols will return soon. We must move before they detect us." Ethan rubbed his neck and smiled faintly. "You know, you could just leave me here and save yourself the trouble." She turned to face him. Her visor glowed brighter. "If I leave you, you will die." "I do not leave the wounded behind," Ethan nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'm lucky you have a soft spot." She paused, almost confused by his words. "Soft spot?" "It means you care more than you admit," he said. Her visor flickered once. "You think too much, human." "Yeah," he said, standing with effort. "That's kind of what we do." They left the bunker and climbed through the broken ruins above. The air outside was heavy with smoke, and the wind carried fine black ash across the land. Strange glowing plants grew between the cracks in the stone, their light dim and cold. Thara scanned the horizon. her armor producing soft beeps as she checked for threats. Ethan followed her, limping but determined. As they walked, Ethan kept talking, unable to stop him. Elf, I used to think Scifi were just machines. No feelings, no mercy. But you're different. Thara didn't look back. I am Scifi. I obey the code. Yeah, but you also saved me, he said. That doesn't sound like blind obedience. Her tone grew colder. You misunderstand. I saved you because it was honorable, not emotional. Ethan grinned. If you say so. For a long time they walked in silence. Then, without warning, Thara raised her arm and motioned for him to stop. A faint metallic sound came from behind a ridge. She activated her armor's cloaking field and her body shimmered before vanishing into thin air. Ethan crouched behind a rock, heart pounding. Moments later, a Scifi drone appeared in the sky, scanning the area with a red beam. Thara reappeared behind it, jumping with incredible speed and strength. With one clean strike of her energy blade, she sliced through the drone and it exploded in a burst of sparks. She landed smoothly, her armor steaming. Ethan stood up slowly, clapping once. That was impressive, he said. Silence, she said sharply. More will come. But as she turned toward him, her step faltered. Smoke from the explosion had burned through part of her shoulder plate, leaving a glowing mark. She tried to ignore it, but Ethan saw the small tremor in her arm. You're hurt, he said, moving closer. It is nothing, she said. Let me see. I said it is nothing, she repeated, but her voice wavered slightly. He reached out before she could stop him and gently touched the damaged part of her armor. The metal was hot. He found a release latch and pulled it open carefully. Thara stepped back quickly, her voice tense. Do not, but it was too late. The plate came loose, and beneath it, Ethan caught a glimpse of pale, luminous skin marked with faint blue lines that glowed like veins of light. It wasn't metal or synthetic, and it was alive. She gasped and turned away from him, quickly sealing the armor again. Ethan froze. You're not a machine. Her voice was cold now. Do not touch me again. He stepped back, realizing he had crossed a line. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. She didn't answer. Her visor stayed turned away, but he could hear her breathing faster than before. She had never shown weakness to anyone, not even her own kind. Yet this human had seen her, not as a soldier, but as something real. After a while, she said quietly, The Scifi are not machines. We are flesh and bone like you, but we wear the armor so that no one can see our faces. We are taught that the face is a weapon of weakness. Ethan spoke gently. I don't think it's weakness. It's what makes you alive. She shook her head. You do not understand. Then help me, he said softly. Help me understand. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she started walking again, her voice quiet. Long ago the Scifi lost their world. The elders believed emotions caused our fall. They made the armor to protect us, from others and from ourselves. We were forbidden to show what we feel. Ethan followed beside her. So you hide behind metal because you're afraid to feel? She turned her visor toward him. Afraid? No, but emotion brings chaos, and chaos destroys order. He looked ahead at the endless wasteland. Maybe, but sometimes order destroys the heart. They stopped near a ridge as the sun began to set behind the black clouds. Red light reflected off Thara's armor, and for a moment it looked almost human in color. She stared at the sky silently, as if trying to remember something forgotten long ago. Ethan sat on a rock beside her. You asked me yesterday what humans want most, he said quietly. I think I have a better answer now. She looked at him. And what is it? To be understood, he said. Even if it's by someone we're supposed to fight. Thara didn't speak. Her visor dimmed slowly, and when she finally turned away, her voice was almost a whisper. Understanding leads to pain. But still, I do not hate your words, Ethan smiled faintly. That's a start. The night grew colder. They built a small fire using broken cables and dry fragments of alien vines. As the flames flickered, Ethan noticed Thara sitting closer than before, her armor reflecting the light like liquid silver. He didn't know what she was thinking, and she didn't know why she stayed near him. But both of them felt something shift in the silence, something fragile and strange that neither the armor nor Thara didn't move. Her glowing visor stayed fixed on the horizon. Tiredness is weakness. The code says we must not feel it. Maybe, Ethan said, leaning back, but even machines overheat if you don't give them rest. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, to his surprise, she asked quietly, Do humans ever stop fighting? He thought for a moment before answering. Sometimes, when they find something worth living for instead. She turned her visor toward him slowly. And what do you live for, Ethan Cole? He looked into the fire. Once it was duty. Then it became survival. Now, he smiled faintly, now it's about understanding you, I guess. Her armor lights flickered as if confused by the warmth in his voice. That is foolish, she said, but her voice lacked its usual strength. Maybe, he said, smiling softly. But humans are good at being foolish. Before Thara could reply, the fire suddenly dimmed as a strange static filled the air. Her armor sensors blinked red. She stood up quickly, scanning the dark sky. Drones. They have found us. Ethan grabbed his weapon, though it barely worked. How many? Too many, she said, drawing her plasma blade. Run to the ruins. I will cover you. Not without you, he said firmly. She turned to face him. Do not argue. You are not trained to fight them. Ethan gave her a look that made her pause. Maybe not like you, but I can still help. She hesitated for just a second before nodding. Stay close. The air filled with a deep humming sound as the Sarathi drones appeared, black spheres glowing with red energy, scanning the ruins below. Thara leaped forward, her armor blazing with blue light, and struck the first one out of the air. The explosion sent shards of metal flying. Ethan ducked behind a broken wall and fired at another, his shot hitting it squarely and sending it spinning into the sand. One by one, they fought together. Thara moved like lightning, her blade cutting through the darkness. Ethan covered her from behind, shooting any drone that tried to flank her. For a moment, it almost felt like they were a single unit, two soldiers from different worlds moving as one. Then, without warning, a large blast hit the ground near them. The shockwave threw Ethan backward. He landed hard, his weapon flying from his hands. When he looked up, he saw Thara standing in the center of the smoke, her armor cracked, sparks running across it. She had taken the full force of the blast meant for him. Thara, he shouted, crawling toward her. Her movements were slower now. Stay back, she said, but her voice trembled. Ethan ignored her and reached her side. One of her armor plates was broken, revealing part of her pale shoulder and glowing blue veins underneath. She tried to cover it again, but her fingers shook. Ethan took her hand gently. It's okay, he said. I've seen worse. You do not understand, she said, her voice weak. If they see me like this, and if my people know, they will call me defiled. I will lose my honor. He looked at her faceplate, which was cracked down the middle. Through the small gap, he saw the faint outline of her eyes, bright silver with a shimmer of light. Then forget their honor, he said quietly. You saved my life again. That's what matters. She looked at him for a long moment, silent. Then she whispered, Why do you say such things, human? He smiled faintly. Because they're true. She tried to stand, but stumbled. Ethan helped her up, wrapping her arm around his shoulder. Together they moved through the ruins until they reached an old tower. They climbed to the top, where the air was clearer and a faint signal light blinked weakly on an old transmitter. This was part of the first human colony, Ethan said. Maybe I can boost a signal and call for help. Thara shook her head. If you send a signal, both sides will find us. I'll risk it, he said. We can't keep running forever. While he worked on the transmitter, Thara sat nearby, her armor flickering with dim light. She looked at him silently, her expression hidden behind the cracked visor. But inside, she felt something strange, fear, confusion, and something close to warmth. After a few minutes, Ethan spoke without looking up. You don't have to keep pretending you're just a soldier. She didn't answer, but her voice softened. What would I be if not that? He turned to her and said gently, You'd be Thara. Something inside her armor glowed brighter for a moment, not from energy, but from emotion. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply looked away and said, You talk too much. Ethan laughed softly. Yeah, my best and worst quality. Suddenly the transmitter beeped. A weak human signal came through, distorted but real. Ethan's eyes lit up. I got it. The fleet's still in orbit. But Thara's armor sensor started flashing red again. She looked at him sharply. They heard the signal. Not just your people, mine too. Ethan's smile faded. Then we need to leave now. No, she said, standing slowly. There is no time. They will come for me. For us. He looked at her, realizing the risk she had taken. She had aved him again. even though it meant her own death if discovered. For a long moment they stood together on the tower as the sky filled with distant lights, ships descending through the clouds. Thara looked at him and said quietly, "If I do not return, remember me as I was here, not as what they made me." Ethan swallowed hard. "You're not just armor, Thara. You're more human than most people I know." Her visor dimmed, and for a brief second her hand touched his. The gesture was small, but it said everything she couldn't put into words. Above them, thunder rolled and lights grew brighter. The storm of war was returning, but something far greater had already begun between them, something that even the endless war could never erase. The sky burned with red light as Sarathi ships broke through the clouds. Their engines thundered like distant storms, and the ground shook with each passing second. Ethan and Thara stood on the broken tower, watching the darkness fill with ships and flashes of plasma fire. The war had found them again. There was no hiding now. Ethan's radio crackled weakly. A human voice shouted through the static. "Lieutenant Cole, this is Commander Reeves of the Arcadia Fleet. We received your signal. Hold position, we're sending retrieval." Ethan's eyes widened. "They found us," he said, turning to Thara. "We can get out of here." But Thara's visor dimmed. "No," she said softly. "Your signal also reached my people." Even before she finished, a second wave of dark shapes appeared in the clouds. Sarathi dropships. Their sleek metal bodies reflected the lightning flashing around them. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "Then we fight," he said, gripping his rifle. Thara turned toward him. "You cannot fight them. They will not stop." "Neither will I," he said. For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally she nodded once. "Then we fight together." The first Sarathi unit landed near the ruins, their armored soldiers marching in formation. Blue energy glowed across their weapons. Ethan and Thara moved down the tower and took cover behind broken steel beams. Plasma bolts lit up the sky as the battle began. Thara moved like lightning. Even with her armor cracked and weak, she was faster than any human could ever be. She cut through the first wave, her plasma blade leaving trails of glowing blue light. Ethan fired at the drones circling above, taking down 2 of them. The air was filled with smoke and the roar of explosions. "More incoming!" Ethan shouted, ducking as debris fell beside him. Thara leaped in front of him, blocking the next blast with her arm shield. Sparks rained down around them. "Stay behind me," she ordered. "Not a chance," he yelled, firing again. One of the Sarathi soldiers shouted a command in their language. Thara froze for a moment. She knew that voice. It belonged to Commander Varric, her superior. He was tall, his armor shining black, the symbol of their high command glowing on his chest. His voice came through her communicator like cold steel. "Commander Thara Ven, you have betrayed the Legion. Remove your armor and surrender for judgment." Ethan looked at her. "What's he talking about?" Thara didn't answer. She stepped forward slowly, her blade at her side. "Commander Varric," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The human is under my protection. He is not your enemy anymore." "Your words are treason," Varric said. "You have broken the code. You saved a human. You dishonor our kind." Thara raised her chin slightly. "Perhaps the code is already broken. We fight to destroy, not to protect. We wear armor to hide what we truly are." Varric raised his weapon. "Then you are no longer Sarathi." Ethan saw what was about to happen and stepped forward. "Wait, you don't have to do this," he shouted, but Varric fired first. The blast hit the ground near them, throwing Ethan backward. Thara's armor sparked again, taking part of the impact. Smoke filled the air. When the dust cleared, she was kneeling, struggling to stand. Her visor was cracked completely now, showing part of her face, silver eyes bright and afraid. Varric pointed his weapon at her again. "Remove the armor. Let the world see your shame." Ethan grabbed a piece of metal and threw it at Varric to distract him. "You want to see someone brave? Look at her," he shouted. "She saved me when you would have left me to die. You call that shame? I call that strength." The Sarathi soldiers hesitated for a moment, surprised by his words. Thara rose slowly, her armor flickering like a dying flame. "Enough," she said quietly. Then she looked at Ethan. "You once said humans fight for what they love." He nodded, breathing hard. "And you said your people fight for silence." She looked back at Varric. "Then let my silence end here." With one final motion, she reached to her neck and released the locks of her armor. The plates fell away piece by piece, hitting the ground with heavy echoes. The last piece, the helmet, she removed with trembling hands. For the first time, her face was bare under the crimson light. Her skin was pale with glowing markings that ran across her temples and cheeks like silver streams. Her eyes shone softly, full of life and sadness. Ethan could hardly breathe as he looked at her. She was beautiful, not because of how she looked, but because of what she had just done, defied everything her people believed. Varric stepped back in shock. "You shame us all," he said. Thara's voice was steady. "No. I remind you that we are alive." Varric raised his weapon again, but before he could fire, Ethan shot first. The plasma bolt hit Varric's shoulder, sending him crashing into the ground. The Sarathi soldiers froze, unsure whether to continue. Ethan ran to Thara's side. "We have to go now," he said urgently. She looked at him, her silver eyes bright with determination. "No," she said softly. "If we run, they will follow." "You must leave. I'm not leaving you here," he shouted. She reached out and touched his cheek gently. "You already gave me what I wanted, Ethan Cole." He frowned. "What do you mean? When I asked you what humans want, you said peace and someone to understand. Now I understand too." Before he could respond, she turned toward the Sarathi soldiers and raised her hand. Her armor's core flared one last time, glowing brighter than ever. "Go," she said, her voice strong. "Now!" Ethan hesitated, then finally ran toward the extraction signal in the distance. Behind him, Thara stood tall in the storm of fire and smoke. The light from her armor burst into the air, blinding the battlefield. When the human dropship arrived minutes later, Ethan looked back through the window. The ruins were burning, but he could still see one faint blue light in the darkness, steady, proud, and unbroken. He whispered her name softly. Thara. In that moment, he didn't see an enemy or a soldier. He saw the being who had shown him what courage truly meant, and what it cost to be free. The dropship lifted into the smoky sky, leaving behind the burning ruins of Varellus 9. Inside, Ethan sat by the small viewing window, staring down at the red clouds that covered the planet like a wound. His hands were shaking, his body covered in dust and blood, but his mind refused to rest. All he could see in his thoughts was Thara, standing alone in the fire without her armor, facing her people with nothing but courage. The pilot called out from the front, "Lieutenant Cole, you're lucky we found you in time." "We thought no one made it out alive," Ethan didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the clouds. "Did your sensors detect any other life signs?" he asked. "Negative," the pilot said. "No human or Sarathi signals active. You were the only survivor." Ethan leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. He wanted to believe that wasn't true. Somewhere inside, a quiet voice told him she was still alive. Thara wasn't the kind of person who would fall easily, not after what she had shown him. Hours later, the dropship docked with the orbiting fleet carrier Arcadia. Medics rushed him to the infirmary, cleaned his wounds, and checked his vitals. They asked questions. What happened, how he survived, what destroyed the colony. But Ethan answered with only part of the truth. He didn't mention Thara, he couldn't. To the military, she was the enemy. To him, she was something entirely different. After treatment, he was taken to the command deck. Commander Reeves, an older man with a scar across his chin, stood waiting for him. "Lieutenant Cole," Reeves said, "we received fragments of your report. You sent a distress signal under fire. How did you manage that?" Ethan kept his voice steady. "I found an old transmitter in the ruins. It was pure luck." Reeves studied him for a long moment. "And the Sarathi?" "Gone," Ethan said quietly. "They destroyed each other," the commander frowned. "You saw it happen?" Ethan looked out the viewport where the planet glowed faintly below. "Yes," he said softly. "I saw everything," Reeves nodded slowly. "Get some rest, soldier. You've done enough for now." When Ethan was alone again, he went to the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly and the wounded planet turned slowly beneath them. He pressed a hand against the glass, whispering, "You made me promise to live, so I will, but if you're still out there, I'll find you." Days passed aboard the Arcadia. The war continued elsewhere, but Ethan couldn't focus on briefings or orders. Every night he dreamed of Thara, the way she had looked at him, the sound of her voice when she said she understood. He could almost hear her whisper in his head, "Understanding leads to pain." She had been right. One morning, a young technician entered his quarters with a data pad. "Lieutenant, we received a strange transmission," he said. "It's not from our network, but it carries a human encrypti. On key. You should see it." Ethan took the pad and played the file. The screen flickered, showing only static at first. Then a faint image appeared, a silhouette surrounded by blue light. The voice was distorted but clear enough for him to recognize. Ethan Cole, if you hear this. I am alive, he froze. His breath caught in his throat. It was her. Thara. I was taken by my people, the voice continued. They call me traitor. But I am not one. I learned what they fear. They fear the truth of what we are. I will not serve their silence anymore. The image glitched for a moment, then cleared. Do not come for me, she said. They are watching. But remember what I told you. Your heart is your greatest armor, and mine is no longer steel. The message ended abruptly, leaving the room in silence. Ethan stood still, holding the datapad tightly. His chest felt heavy, but for the first time in days he smiled. She's alive, he whispered. He went straight to the command center, but he didn't tell anyone what he had seen. It wasn't a military matter, it was personal. The war between humans and Scifi was still burning across the stars, but Ethan's mind was already somewhere else. He had seen the strength of one Scifi who dared to change, and he knew she wasn't the only one. That night he sat at his small desk and began to record his own message. Thara, he said softly, I don't know if you'll hear this. I don't know where they're keeping you. But you were right about one thing. We fight for love, and that makes us strong. You taught me that. If you ever need me, I'll be there, no matter what side the stars put us on. He sent the message through a private channel, coded so deeply that even his superiors couldn't track it. Then he leaned back and looked at the stars outside his window. Somewhere out there, Thara was alive, fighting her own war. Weeks turned into months. Ethan returned to active duty, leading new missions, but something inside him had changed. He no longer saw the Scifi as faceless enemies. Every time he looked into the distance, he remembered the silver eyes behind the visor. The voice that once said, maybe silence isn't strength. One evening, while patrolling near the border systems, his ship intercepted another transmission. It was brief, only a few seconds long, but he knew the signal. A single phrase came through the static. The stars remember you. Ethan smiled quietly. He knew what it meant. It was her way of saying she was still fighting, still free. He stood by the window again, watching the stars shimmer against the dark void. He felt the warmth of hope return to him. For the first time since the battle, Ethan didn't feel alone. Somewhere among 1,000 burning worlds, a Scifi woman without armor was carving a new path, not as a soldier, but as someone who finally understood what it meant to live. And though the war continued, a small part of it had already ended, in the bond between a human and a being who had once been his enemy. A bond strong enough to outlast the silence of any galaxy. Months passed since the last battle on Varellus 9. The war between humans and the Scifi Legion still echoed across the stars. But for Lieutenant Ethan Cole, everything felt different now. He had seen what no other human soldier had seen. A Scifi without her armor, without hate, and without fear. Every day her memory followed him like a quiet shadow. Ethan now served aboard a smaller vessel called Solace, a reconnaissance ship sent to patrol neutral space. It was quieter here, far from the main battle lines. The crew respected him, but they didn't know the truth of what had happened on that broken world. To them, he was just a survivor. To him, he was someone who had seen the heart of the enemy and found something worth believing in. He stood alone on the deck, watching distant suns blink across the blackness. His reflection stared back from the window, tired eyes, short hair, and a small scar on his neck from the explosion months ago. He touched the metal tag around his neck where he had secretly scratched a single word, Thara. It was his reminder that humanity wasn't just about fighting, but about feeling. Late one night, the ship's comms officer called him. Sir, we're getting a strange signal again, she said. Encrypted off the grid, same frequency pattern as before. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Patch it through, he said quickly. The main screen flickered. Static filled the air for a few seconds, and then a soft blue light appeared. The outline of a figure took shape, tall, graceful, and faintly glowing. Her voice, calm and gentle, broke through the noise. Ethan Cole, she said. He stepped closer to the screen. Thara, he whispered. She smiled faintly, though the image was grainy. You survived again, she said softly. I am glad. I thought I lost you, he said. After the battle, they said everyone on the planet was gone. They wanted you to believe that, she said. They took me prisoner. but I escaped. There are others like me now. Sarathi who question the code, who want peace. We hide in the shadows waiting for the right time to speak. Ethan couldn't stop smiling, though his voice trembled. You always had more courage than anyone I've ever known. She looked at him quietly. Courage is not mine alone. You gave it to me. There was silence between them for a moment. The hum of the ship and the distant crackle of the signal were the only sounds. Then Thara said softly, I have missed our talks. Humans speak with warmth. It feels real. Ethan nodded. You taught me that strength isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about letting people see who you really are. Thara tilted her head slightly as if smiling. And now you sound like me. The connection flickered again and her image blurred. Ethan reached toward the screen instinctively. Don't go. Tell me where you are, Thara. I can find you. No, she said quickly. You must not come. If they find us, they will destroy everything we've built. The Sarathi are afraid, not of your weapons, but of your spirit. They fear the way humans change those who meet them. Ethan took a slow breath. Then promise me one thing. Promise me you'll stay alive. I will, she said quietly. And you promise me you will keep believing. You are the proof that not all battles are won with guns. He nodded, his eyes soft. You have my word. Before the signal faded, she whispered one last sentence. When the stars burn bright, look for the blue light among them. That will be me. The screen went black. The room was silent again, but Ethan felt warmth instead of sadness. For the first time in months, he felt peace. He walked to the window and looked out at the galaxy stretching before him. The stars shimmered like distant memories. Somewhere out there, among the endless lights, Thara was alive, free and unmasked. The next morning, Ethan submitted a formal request to transfer to a diplomatic assignment. His commander was surprised. You're one of the best soldiers we have, Reeves said. Why step away now? Ethan smiled faintly. Because I've been fighting the wrong way. Maybe it's time to start fixing what we broke. Reeves studied him for a moment, then nodded. You sound like someone who's seen too much. Ethan looked out the viewport again. Maybe I've just seen enough to know what matters. Weeks later, the Solace was reassigned to a border station near the edge of Sarathi space. Rumors began spreading about quiet truces, about Sarathi defectors sending messages of peace. Some humans laughed at the idea, but Ethan didn't. He had seen it with his own eyes. He had seen her. One evening, while alone in the observation bay, the lights flickered. A small holographic device he kept hidden in his pocket activated on its own. A blue light appeared, faint but steady. It wasn't a message, just a pulse repeating every few seconds. Ethan smiled, recognizing it instantly. I see you, he whispered. He stood there for a long time, watching the light fade and return like a heartbeat across the stars. For him, it wasn't just a signal. It was a promise that even in a universe filled with war and silence, two souls from opposite worlds could still find a way to reach each other. As the ship drifted through the quiet dark, Ethan thought of the words he had once said in a ruined bunker when everything seemed lost. What do humans want most? He finally understood the answer completely now. Humans didn't just want peace or survival. They wanted connection, to be seen, to be understood, even by those the universe called enemies. And somewhere beyond the galaxies, Thara Ven, the Sarathi who took off her armor for a human's joke, looked up at the same stars and whispered softly, I still hear you. Their worlds remained divided by distance and war, but their hearts had already crossed that boundary. The war might take years to end, but something new had begun, a quiet hope between a soldier and a being who had once lived behind steel.